I my name is Sharon Burns, and that's what I ask people to call me. However, if you call me a few other names, I will answer. My students always ask, and they always begin by, do we call you Dr. Burns or Professor? Or I say, look, we're adults. You call me by my name, I'll call you by your name. We're all people here for the same purpose. And so please feel free to call me whatever you will, and I'll try to answer your questions. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. This is going to be a kind of a very informal, interactive session. If you have questions, stop me at any time, and I'll answer those questions as best I can. And if you have input, same thing. I brought a few goodies, and that's what Casey is handing out, a few goodies based on some information. And I have to acknowledge one person. My husband was up at 10:30 last night stuffing folders for me. We're in finals at UC this week, as most universities are, so I am desperately grading, and meeting with students, and this is a great escape, I'll tell you. I was sick of grading, and I still have a lot of that to do. So I brought information, and one of the things I want to do is discuss this information with you about the link between high school and college. I have three children who are, well, I have three adult children who are college graduates. Two of those were boys. I still think of them as boys, and they were challenged a lot by reading and writing, particularly writing. And because Mom was the writing expert, I think that magnified their issues in some ways. But the thing that I finally figured out when the third one went to college was the difference between June, May or June when they graduate, and August when they go to college is really that in 3 months they've laid around the house and done absolutely nothing. But they haven't all of a sudden become this magnified, wonderful, educated person that's now mature enough for college. It didn't happen to them. And I thought, well, if it didn't happen to them, chances are it's not happening to a lot of other students who make that transition. In the college classroom now, when that group of freshmen come and sit in front of me, I see them very differently because of that. They're simply 3 months older. They're not all of a sudden aware of this opportunity as, oh, this is one of the greatest things that's happened to me, or aren't I so lucky because I can go to college and think about all the people. None of those things hit them. It's, oh, this is English class. Just let me get out of here. Just let me get out. That's all I want. So I try to think about that in those terms, that these are kids who really are there to learn. The difference between me and what you do is, for the most part, these kids are with me because they want to be. Now, there are several, like me, who said to my son, you get in that class, and you come out of that class because I want you to. And it was helpful. Knowing that Mom was there to say, I want you there, yes, that was helpful. But for the most part, they're there because they want to be. That said, I will tell you that most of them hate English. You know, you have that group that's either really good at writing and English or really good at math. That's the two groups that we see, and the majority of the students that I deal with tell me all the time, if I just didn't have to take an English class. So, my passion for writing in particular, I try to really work with those students to instill some type of appreciation, if nothing else, for writing. Let's start kind of at the beginning. We'll look at these packets in just a second, but I want to start out by giving you some idea of the expectation for us. Like you, and I tell you, I'm very humbled by being in front of this group of students. The amount of knowing and knowledge in this room, if I live to be 100, I won't get a third of it. But what you do, I think it's such a segue to where these students are going to go. And I don't look at them as just coming to college and then finishing that part. They're going on to life. When you finish with them, they're moving into life. And if college is a part of that life, then great. If it's not, then they use the skills they have in other ways. I work with a lot of different programs and remedial efforts. I work with local schools on a personal level, not as a professional, because I see the need for students to be able to communicate. They're out there trying to compete for things, positions, places, pay. They need those skills. So I do a lot of volunteer work to help those kinds of efforts along as well. When they come to me, then I have to put on that professional face and say, okay, the Ohio Department of Education has said, here's what I've got to give you. And basically the thing that I want you to understand is there are 5 components, 5 areas that we have had to build in answer to that idea of good writing, writing for life. Those start with rhetorical knowledge. Then we move on to critical thinking, reading and writing, knowledge of the writing process, knowledge of conventions, and then composing in electronic environments. Right now, those are the 5 components, the 5 areas that we answer to the Ohio Department of Education. So all of the student outcomes that we create in writing, we create in answer to those particular areas. I have those written in your handout as well so that we can talk about each of those as they pertain to what students, the expectation of what students will do. I want to give you a little bit of insight about the structure. At least, I can't speak for everyone, but I can speak for the University of Cincinnati. I serve on the University Composition Committee. I am moving into a coordinating position in January where I'll coordinate our composition program at UC Claremont. We are, of course, the Ohio transfer modules. We're adhering to those so that students are able to transfer between any universities in the state of Ohio. We like to think bigger than that, but at least we know this works. The structure right now is set up as one of our institutions, our UC Blue Ash campus, you may be familiar with. They offer a 095 course. That's for students who do not even meet an 8th grade basic level of writing and yet are applying to college. They have students in those courses. We have an 096, an 097, and we've recently, in our change to semesters, we've recently moved this to a 1000. We wanted to offer students who need a remedial course the opportunity to at least get a 1000 level college credit. Anything below 1000 they don't get college credit for. So we wanted them to at least have that opportunity, while at the same time it is a remedial course and it's helping them improve those writing skills. The news is, and we've come to terms with it, and we hope our counterparts do as well. Right now, at least in our part of the world, our remedial courses, well, let me put it like this. The simple way to say it is 50% or right at 50% of the students who enter college English are testing into remedial courses. For us, it's a challenge. It's sometimes discouraging. But, as I said, we've come to terms with it, and now how do we deal with that? We've partnered with ABLE in places. We're looking at other solutions via some of the technical institutions. We know this is costing students. It's costing them their financial aid. It's costing them in other ways, time as well, time to completion, which you know ODE takes a strong look at. So we're trying to come up with viable solutions of how we move this along. Some of those include the ideas of summer boot camp. There are students out there, like I was, a non-traditional student who just said, man, I've been out of school for 120 years. Do I even know anything about writing anymore? So we know that that population exists. We know that there are students who aren't good test takers. So when they take a placement test, even though it's not a graded test, they may be challenged as well. So we're looking at some viable options to help that student who's on the bubble move forward. But still yet, we have this population of students that we have to think about as the curriculum challenges us then to move them, especially now that we're in semesters. You think about instead of 4 times a year to have an opportunity to pass that class, now they have 3. So we have put some measures in place, and these are fairly new. I'll kind of explain a little bit about those as well. Because some of us were ethically challenged by the idea of a student taking a number one, a remedial course for college tuition, but number 2, that they were taking it repeatedly because they could not pass it. Their financial aid was drying up. We were concerned about that. So at our institution, and we are allowed to do this institution by institution, even regionals within a major university system, we've decided that a student can take a remedial English course no more than twice. If they can't pass it the second time, then they have to write an appeal to a board that approves their being able to take it again, or we provide a support service now with ABLE in Claremont County to help that student. So for us, that was huge. We had students taking remedial courses 3, 4, and sometimes 5 times. And ethically, there were those of us who felt like that was a challenge, both for the student and for the institution. So we do have some new measures in place that weren't there before. There are those in math, but I'm not going to speak to those. That's a whole different subject. Specifically, when we talk about, Casey, did you by chance give them all a card? Did you see those cards? Because this is going to be an interactive session, I have a little bit of homework for you as well. One of the things that when I do something like this, I want to get something out of it too. I'll just be honest. I want to know what you're thinking. So I decided to kind of integrate. Yes, if you'll give everybody one of those. I have a question, and I ask my students this the first day of class every semester. I have them write a little bit, and one of the things I do is ask this question. I want to know, in a sentence or two, what do you think college writing is? I know it sounds like a really simple, almost sometimes dumb question. My students tell me that's a dumb question. And yet when I get the answers back, I go, oh, okay, so I know where we're going. But I want to know from you, what is college writing in your mind? I'm going to give you a minute to answer that question. If you don't mind to write it down, hang on to the card because I have another question for the other side later on.
What is college writing?
What is college writing? Some people answer that philosophically, others answer it specifically. Are we missing a card? Casey, do you have those, or did you put them back? Oh, you're hogging the cards. Now, as you're finishing up, I'm going to tell you the answer that some of my students have given. And these are answers that I consistently get. It's about where to put the comma. I get that answer a lot. It's about where you put the comma. It's about writing about stuff that we read. Okay, that's fair. It's about writing about stuff that we read. I don't know. I'm taking this course because it's required for my major. Please give me an A and let me move on. I get that one a lot. Which, I tell them all the time. If you're going to suck up to the teacher, start at the very beginning. That way she knows that you're sincere all the way through. I think I did a little research project as I was finishing up my dissertation a few years ago, well, some years ago, and one of the things that I got from students over and over again is basically they don't know what they're supposed to do in college writing. They don't have a clue what they're supposed to do. They think it's a carryover maybe from what they did as a senior in high school, but they're not really sure what they did as a senior in high school sometimes. We have that conversation. So I find it very interesting then to understand that concept through your eyes, to then be able to relate back to the students, okay, this is the understanding that we have as a community. Do you understand this as a student? So it is helpful information, and I appreciate your giving me the answers that you did. Anybody want to share? Nobody wants to share. Let me ask it like this. Will somebody share? Give us a few ideas of what you think college writing is really about.
Being able to communicate effectively in professional ways, important, but also personally. I think it's about the bigger picture.
Okay.
Than more narrow perspective.
Good.
Something like turning the understandings that you get from reading or viewing or listening, speaking into your own ideas and knowledge to better understand people.
Okay.
I said it was showing what you learned and how you learned it.
Okay. I would only add to that a piece that I share with my students is it's not about academic writing. You're simply learning this so that when you leave here, this is a skill that you carry with you. It's something that is going to serve you the rest of your life. This is just the place you come to learn it. It's not the only place that you can learn it, but it's the place that you come to learn it. And when students see that bigger picture, then I think they're a little bit more receptive. I'll share with you probably the first statement I share with my students, and I believe in this more than I believe in the idea of education overall, and that is good writing, I believe with all my heart, brings us respect in a way that nothing else can. And when I say that, I don't care if you are the best physicist in the world. I don't care if you're the doctor that discovers the cure for cancer. If you can't write, there's a gap there. There's a gap not only in your knowledge base, but there's a gap in your own personal understanding of yourself. I believe that writing brings us respect. I had a student do a research paper not too long ago on the idea of online applications for jobs, sending your resume online, that whole kind of thing. I promised I wouldn't share her title because she was a little concerned about that. But anyway, she wrote this paper based on the idea that students nowadays, when they graduate from college, don't have as much of an opportunity in the job market because they don't get to share themselves with a prospective employer. I said, wait, yes you do. You just do it through writing. Well, of course, that was blown to bits because if they could see my face, if they could, I bought this suit and how nice I look and all of these sort of things. Yes, that's true, but that's what you portray through your writing in very different ways. So all of those things combined together, I try to make my classes very fun and interactive for students, especially those that are struggling to really believe that they can. It's kind of like those of us who sometimes believe that we can do or not do something ourselves. Our students are the same way. And they don't believe that they can actually make anything out of this. Okay, so let's take a look. We've kind of looked at the structure. Now, right now we're on a semester system. We just changed over to this semester system. So we have what we call a first-year writing sequence. But our students in the semester system, I think right now are at a disadvantage, and we're hoping to do something about this. They take a freshman writing course, Freshman Comp 1001, if they place into college-level writing. I have found that to be one of the biggest challenges in teaching that I have ever faced, and that is simply I have to take this student who walks in the door and sits down and says, I'm not sure I know how to write a sentence, all the way to an argumentative, evidence, fact-based research paper in 15 weeks. I might as well fly to the moon on my own sometimes because I just don't know that that's a possibility. We've had some successes and we've had some very distinct failures. And as a group, we sat down, as a group of faculty, sat down to say, okay, what's wrong with this picture and what good came out of this? This was, of course, our first semester, so we're doing some readjusting and rethinking. Now our students have a gap. They have a spring semester where they don't write. Unless they're required to write in a science, a math, a history class, they don't write. Because their second course now is not going to come until the beginning of their sophomore year. To me, that's a very scary idea. Now they're moving in the sophomore year to a rhetoric-based genre study class in writing. So that's kind of how writing is structured for us. The rhetoric-based genre class is an intense reading course. I have heard everything from, I don't read. It's honestly, a kind of student that will say to me, I don't read. Got emails from a student a couple of weeks ago who said, is there any way to pass your course, wants to sign into my course for the fall, spring, is there any way to pass your course without reading? I just emailed back and said, chances are probably not. What do you say to that? I'm still unsure about what to say to that. But that's the structure of what we're trying to do. And from that point on, sadly to me, I don't know about you as a language arts person, but sadly to me, our students are never again concerned with reading and writing at the college level. So one of my pet projects right now is introducing writing across curriculums, specifically in science. I want to know that our students are writing beyond what we are required to give them, and that's kind of where we're focused. But let me turn back just a little bit to the student who is at that what we call developmental level right now. Let's take a look at, and I'm sorry, I didn't memorize colors, so I've got to look at somebody's sheet. Let me have you look at, first of all, the yellow, canary yellow, the UC placement standards. Every institution is required to develop standards if they require any type of test to come into the university. We require a placement test. You may know of systems, the state of Ohio that are self-placement. We have chosen to use a placement test. We've been doing this for about, I think, 7 years, 8 years now. We vacillate, you know, it'll come full circle and we'll go self-placement for a little while and we'll try this and that. But right now we use a placement test. These are the standards, the scoring rubric, the standards for placement. What we're finding right now is things are a little bit misaligned. But we spent 2 years working with other university systems in the state of Ohio to try to get all of this in place so that they were OBR approved for transition, so on and so forth. And then you got to, as you know, you got to kind of try these things out a little bit, drive the car a little bit to make sure you know how it really feels. And so now that we've done it for a little bit, we're saying, okay, we see a little bit of misalignment. But basically, what we're saying is, if you place here, this is a starting point. The sad situation for me is the student who is at that starting point and they go from 0 to 60 in 3 weeks. And then they have another 12 weeks to get through a course where they're simply bored stiff. We lose a lot of those students simply out of that boredom. So we're looking at ways to enhance that learning experience for them. We're, in fact, hoping to partner with several high school teachers to give us some insight into, okay, so how do we realign that student so that they don't spend a semester spinning their wheels. Other than that, the student that has the 15-week sequence, basically right now our developmental course and our 101s are overlapping. And if you look at the placement standards, then pull out the purple piece these are our outcomes, learning outcomes for Comp 101. It's 1001 for us now. Take a really close look at that and you're going to see a little bit of overlap. In other words, the student who finishes English 1000 is already ahead of the student who places into 1001. So we see a little bit of discrepancy there, some things we need to go back and maybe clean up. The one big issue that we're finding is right now probably huge for us is the idea that ODE is requiring our students to be composing in electronic environments. Now, you can think of that as, oh, well, let's make them sit at a computer and write a paper. That's not my version of composing in electronic environments. I just went back into the classroom face-to-face this fall. I have been teaching online I've taught online for about 6 years, but I'm full-time teaching online for 2 years as part of a research project. I was shocked, because I require all of my students to submit everything to me electronically. Everything they write is, I do not touch a piece of paper in my class. Everything is done electronically. And my students will say things from, this is not a computer course, why are you making us do, to, sadly, I don't have access. Now, what we do know is the college provides access, so we know we have access. It's just that my schedule and your schedule don't match. The lab's not open when. These are things that, you know, in a lesser developed, I want to say economically developed area of the state, we're dealing with. Because our partners who are driving these kind of rules on the main campus at Clifton, this is not an issue for most of them. So we kind of find ourselves at a crossroads there. However, that's probably the biggest challenge in everything that you're going to see here for us is that teaching that composing in electronic environments to our students. When I ask my students, okay, do you write? They come in and they sit down and say, do you all write? No, I don't write. Okay, well, do you text? Well, yeah, I text. Do you email? Yeah, we email, but we don't write. And sadly, I mean, that's kind of the consensus across the board. They don't think that writing has to do with. I was talking to Casey on my way up here, and I wish I had brought it for you all to see. Some of you may have read it. In the Inquirer this past week, there was an article. The question was, does tech, how was it worded? Does tech necessarily mean sloppy? And the whole idea of the article was because this woman had gotten several emails from colleagues in a professional setting, and she said, after you read the email, there's this little caveat at the bottom that says, if there are mistakes in this email, please know that it was sent via iPad. Therefore, if I don't capitalize, if I don't put things in the right place, if words are misspelled, please forgive me because I use my iPad. So I just asked my students, what do you think? Well, if we have to do it right, They got a big response. They were almost irate about that whole deal, but a lot of my students had never typed on an iPad. I passed mine around and gave them the experience and said, okay, how does that keyboard feel for you? And so they're understanding a little bit more, but ethically they're saying to me, no, it's not fair. Of course, these are young college students, but they're saying in the professional world, if you're going to require this, you're going to require this across the board. So some of those things that we're beginning to talk about, especially in developmental courses, link them to the idea of what I'm going to be as a professional. And if I can get them to thinking that way, then I can see a big difference in the student's attitude across the course. Then when we begin to talk about the research topics, and we have research topics, we call them, I just say to them, let's argue. This class is going to be about arguing. This happens in developmental courses, it happens in my 101 course, and we all kind of teach it the same way. One of the examples that I give my students, and I think that they can relate to, I tell them, I had 2 boys, I know what it's like. So you argue. Oh, no, I don't argue. We don't argue at my house. We don't, yeah, right, okay. So I got that point. But when it's time to take out the trash, how do you know who has to take it out? They're stomping. I said, let me tell you about the typical argument that happens at my house. I say, one of you take the trash out before you leave. I took it out last week. No, I did. I did. Mom. And then I get involved. So I say to the student, look, here's what we're going to do. This is what you're going to do in this course. You're simply going to write it down. If you could say to your brother, hey, remember last week before you had soccer practice, you had to jump in the car and leave with Mom, right as she said, somebody take out the trash. You had to leave, it was 5:15, and I didn't have to leave until 6. I tied up the trash and took it out. If you could say that to your brother, you've just won that argument. Writing is as simple as that. It's based on evidence and fact. And then we begin the research process. If I find, if I can relate to my students that what you're doing right here is the same thing that you do every day in life, you're simply doing it on paper, then they get it. Specifically in developmental courses, because they don't understand the purpose of why they're there in the first place, much less why they need to continue. And if I can make those connections for them, and I do them I use my boys, and they know it, as examples all the time in my classes. So every once in a while I have a class that say, could you bring them in and introduce them? No, they won't show their face, I'm sorry, but but it is the same. And when Casey said she had the, what did you call it, the opportunity? When I first met her, I kind of went like this, because I know my son, and I know what kind of kid he was that she taught. And I'm thinking, boy, the past does come back to haunt you every time. And, however, I will say that he's an excellent writer. So I had less to do with that than she did. I'll give her the credit there. So the other piece that we want to take a close look at is this little pink piece right here. As you all know, OBR does have a strong influence in the way that we do things. When you look through the reading, writing, standard expectations there for a college-ready class, what I'd like to hear from you just a little bit is, what do you see as the big differences between what you're doing in your work with secondary institutions and now what you know is expected at the post-secondary level? Now remember, this is an entry level. We're talking, these are the guidelines for freshman level composition. And because I can read the standards and I see what the expectations are, but I don't know, because I'm not in the field, I haven't been in that field, I don't know what the differences are between where they are and where we want them to be when they come into college. And I noticed that I wrote on a few of those before just my little notes I forgot to cross out.
As far as I know, this is the first time there's been alignment, where I look at this and I see the same kind of headings as on the core.
Right.
So if we had this conversation 2 years ago, I have no idea what you're working from as opposed to what we're working.
That's encouraging to me.
It's exciting to look at this, which I hadn't seen before now, and say, oh, it looks so familiar. We're kind of on the same page, I think, for the first time.
Yeah, that's exciting because we have a feeling. Of course, we're not at conferences and in meetings, and we don't deal in those arenas as much as perhaps we should even. But it's exciting to know that finally we're getting closer to those pieces coming together.
It'll probably take a few years before you see it, because we're still ramping up to it.
Right, right. So I guess my biggest question is how do students fall between the crack of where they end in secondary and where they begin in post-secondary? Because we're trying to align these standards, and I think you've hit on something very important here. It may take a few years for these things to really line up, but my big concern has been over the past 2-3 years, where's the crack? Where are these students falling through, and why is that happening? And how do we bridge that gap for them? And I think it's going to take a little bit more, it's going to take a lot of interaction between us and our high school counterparts to say, okay, what's happening here and how are students gaining this information? One of the pieces that I think we're most concerned about as faculty in a college environment is that students don't see this as something so academic that it becomes unuseful to them, that it becomes something a skill that, a segregated skill that they use here and then move on and forget. You can tell, I know you can tell through my conversation that I am a strong language arts advocate. Some of the research proposals that I have put in have named STEM as one of the greatest destructive devices, I think, in public education, because it has left out the underpinning for everything that we teach our kids, and that has to do with English language arts. So when I have a voice on the campus, people already know. I know what she's going to say. I know where she's going to start. But we're making headway there, and that's exciting to me that at least we're beginning to blend those pieces. I have students in my class. We've been doing a program called Supplemental Instruction. I don't know if you know anything about that, but it's a national project out of the University at Kansas City, Missouri. Supplemental instruction is simply putting peers in the classroom so that students are able to interact with them instead of us, causing a whole lot less, I think, conflict in the classroom. But we are asked as faculty to recommend students for peer instruction and supplemental instruction. It is my top writers. Every time, it's the students who can communicate through writing who make the best peer advocates. They're the ones who are sitting in front of the classroom saying, I understand that you're a biology major and you're going to go on into research and you're going to find the cure for all kinds of, but if you can't do this, and that's where I think most of this alignment is helping us bridge that gap. But we're looking, like I say, we're looking for other ideas. I want to show you, I brought along a few textbooks. I know you see textbooks all the time. One of the, I think, advantages of teaching at the college level right now, and I'm just saying right now, is that we're giving the, I don't want to say freedom, but we're giving some choices. Hey, you know where you've best researched, looked, and aligned. What do you think is best for your students? So I can take one of 10,000 books, and nobody else at the institution may ever teach with it. But I can take it and say, hey, I think this is going to be best for my students. So I wanted you to see some of these, to be able to say, hey, this is where students are starting at, and this is where they're finishing at. And this doesn't work at all, because I think you can provide as much help to me. We all know, if you have kids in college, you all know that textbooks are the biggest bane in that population, bless their heart, that they have to pay $100 for a textbook that they might not ever use again. But if you take a look at it, one of the things that we want to make sure of, specifically in our developmental and intermediate courses, is that students have resources. If we can teach them about resources, and more of those are going online, if we can teach them about the resources, then they can be much more successful. They're not going to remember a third of what I say. But I may be able to say to them, hey, here's where you can go. once you leave here, here's where you can go to find these sort of things. We're seeing that if we more closely monitor that, specifically in our developmental courses, we're having much more success. I won't tell you that even at Claremont, as small as we are, we're only about 4,000 students, but as small as we are, even there, we don't have one single textbook that we use in all of our developmental courses. We do have a good resource handbook, but we don't have a single textbook because we're finding, believe it or not, even students in developmental courses are diverse in their learning. Just because they didn't get it or they don't remember it or they don't test well with it doesn't mean that one textbook is going to fulfill the need for all of them. So that's an opportunity we think we can expand on, given the right advice. And I'll be honest with you, I was telling Casey on the way up, we have several high school teachers who are adjuncts, and I chaired the committee for textbook and instruction last year. I invited them by the hundreds to take a look at these textbooks and tell us where you think the link between here and here. And that was probably the wisest choice we've made, was to get their input on the textbooks that we think students are going to benefit from the most. And they had a lot of say, and it was an extended say. I'll tell you that as well. Some of them thought that most of the textbooks started too far beyond where students already were. And their idea was that we go back and pick them up, even if it's a bit redundant, that we go back and pick up a bit of review so that we can get from 0 to 60 in 15 weeks, as opposed to the idea of starting them with the new knowledge contract in a place that they weren't even familiar. So that has helped in our choices as well, and adjuncts tend to teach out of what we call the recommendations. So they had a big say in that, which is something that we're very conscientious of. It has helped a lot. We're also doing workshops. We're in the stages of planning workshops for all of our instructors. We're partnering, it was a grant, we're partnering with UC Maine, UC Blue Ash, and UC Claremont. We're all partnering together to do a summer writing institute, to go back to engage our instructors who have been in the field for years to say, wait a second, our population is changing. Things are a little bit different now than they were when you began 20 years ago. And how do we realign? Is it really, and I guess this is a question I have, is it really that things are so different, or is it a different population of students? I think right now more than ever before we would all agree, more students have an opportunity to attend an institution of higher education than ever before in the history of this country. When you've got nothing but A and B students applying to college, we don't need to worry about that population who falls into the cracks. But now we are an open access institution. Our students do not have to have had the ACT or SAT. However, they do have to have a GED. But what we see is that most of those students with just the GED test into or place into remedial courses. However, because we're open access, they're given that choice. The goal is that they reach that standard by the end of that first year. So, I'm sorry?
Is that just for the branches? Is that what you were saying?
Our two regional campuses, yes. UC Maine, about, what was it, 4 years ago, 5, when Dr. Nancy Zimfer was there, to raise the academic standards of the Clifton Institution. The board passed, I don't know what you want to call it. Anyway, there are no longer remedial courses on the Clifton campus. They all come out to the regionals. Or, of course, there's Cincinnati State right there in the city as well. But we handle all of the remedial coursework. And right now, a third to a half of the English offerings that we make in a fall semester are remedial. That's less usually in the spring.
What would you say to, as something I read or I heard that as secondary English instructors, you hear teachers say it when you're walking down the hall, or you hear students say, I have to know this for a college course, or this is what it's going to be like when we're in college. And somewhere along the line, I feel like we've lost the idea of teaching our high school students where they are, because we're always so busy preparing them for that next step. There seems to be a sense that there's not actual instruction that takes place in the college classroom, that all that instruction is supposed to take place in the high school, and they're supposed to have all this
when they get there.
when they get there.
Well,
Can you speak to that?
I suppose, let me answer it this way. My daughter teaches kindergarten. And I got the idea, I should just go and visit her class. I should just see how the other half, lives. And I would go in there and volunteer and walk around. And I kind of walked around like this because I didn't know what was there. She teaches in one of the poorest districts in the Cincinnati area. Wonderful children. But I wasn't used to kids, wiping their nose on your sleeve and those types of things. But the longer I did this and the longer I stayed and looked around, and then I go back and I look at my college freshmen and go, these are the same people. They're just bigger bodies. My daughter, when I ask her, we sit down and have a serious conversation, and I say, why do you do this? They sneeze on you, they barf on you. Why do you do this? And she said, Mom, if you could see the change, the transformation in that child from the first day they enter, and then when they begin to read, I didn't get that whole concept, and I didn't even really volunteering. But she talked about the idea of first grade being the it. We go through kindergarten, but to reach first grade. And I got to thinking about that in terms of a high school student who then comes to college. The idea is in their head from wherever they get it that I have arrived. I've been educated, and now I've come to college to, I wasn't going to say that word, but. And I'll spend a few years, and at the end of that, they'll give me this little piece of paper, and then I'm somebody. What I would say, and what I say to my college freshmen is, you've just begun. You're here because you want to be here, but here's the beginning. Yes, you've been educated, but you've been educated to get to a place where now you can educate yourself. I mean, that's kind of the way I look at it. You've got to want it. I can't give you anything you don't want. I can't share with you. I can't advise you. I can't mentor you through anything you don't want. So here's where you start. And this is a part of your education for life. And I guess I can't speak for all of my colleagues, but I can tell you that I think we're more cognizant of that in a language arts field than we are in maybe some of the sciences and maths, and I do apologize to my colleagues, but they know very well how I feel about all of that. This isn't just necessarily a life skill they're learning. It's an existence skill. I can live without understanding. In fact, I have I don't even know what to call it, the chemistry table with all those I don't know what those are. And as my son pointed out to me one time, Mama, I can exist without knowing where to put the comma. You can do that. That's true. You can do that. However, it is more reflective of your ability as a person than knowing all of these little chemistry things. So you speak to a worry that I have as a college professor, and that is that there's a us and there's a them. And having put 3 kids through school specifically, and now being in a college classroom, that kind of an attitude is very troublesome to me. We're not an us and them, we're a continuation. And so I look at education as simply being a series of steps, and we're simply the next step. But to try to help students understand that they're there because they know it, it's almost, I kind of hate to say this publicly, but it's almost like knocking their feet out from under them so that you can help them to understand where they are. Because you haven't arrived. You've simply begun a different journey. I don't know if that really answers your question, but I know that as faculty, we have these conversations because we do have concerns that there is a bridge that can't be filled between us as professionals, and there's a mindset in our students that high school was just high school, but now I'm in college. And we need to help them get past that. It's a continuation of a journey that started a long time ago. So that's how I try to address it anyway. I have the same thing you have. I have parents who call me. If you can believe it or not, I have the parents of seniors who call me once in a while. Now look, Ricky has got to get out of college, and he needs your class to do it. What are you going to do to help Ricky? Well, I'm going to be there every day, and I'm going to have my lessons in order, and I'm going to sit beside Ricky and say, here's what we got to do, Ricky. But other than that, that's probably about all I'm able to do, because something tells me there's a reason Ricky's where he's at. I only know that because I have boys. But I have parents, I have students, I have been reported to, I think, all of the different faculties you can be reported to because I've been biased about this or unfair about this grade or all of those. And that's the purpose of these. I think if I believe in anything, I believe in articulating and making public, this is what we expect. Now, if we can go beyond that, happy day. I have some classes. In fact, I had a class this semester. I taught a course in rhetorical grammar I was telling Casey about. I didn't want to let go of those students. That was such a fun class because those students were engaged. I told them, we did a little project. I said, go home, go see a grandparent, go see a parent. Ask them, hey, when you were in school, and if they can remember back that far, ask them, what did you do to remember these little tricks of the trade? The things they came up with were just, it was mind-blowing to me. You know, that R before C, it's R, whatever all that stuff is, that I don't remember off the top of my head. So we created this project, and we created, in fact, our own grammar book for the course because the students were interested in understanding. I had an opportunity to present before an audience full of faculty. As far as I knew, all of these teachers had PhDs. They were from every discipline across the university. And they're sitting in this huge auditorium, just filled. And I was presenting with a science faculty about a topic we were working on for research. And I said, now, let me explain to you some of the fears of my students. The number one fear of my students that I've been able to garner over the years is they don't know where to put the comma. They're coming into freshman English and they don't know where to put the comma. That's their fear. To me, it's hilarious because that's their biggest fear about college English. And so we talked through that, and I helped them understand what it is that we're actually going to do here, that, the comma is so far down on our list of understanding that we don't even count that. And I say the word rhetorical, and then they really panic. And so I say to this group of educated people, okay, so you tell me, where do you put the comma? And it was so funny to watch because they all started kind of sliding down their seat. Like, oh, please, don't call on me, don't call on me. If I'm low enough, she won't know that we're all that way. We all have that same fear. And I use that illustration now with my students to say, look, I'm no different than you. You could ask me, and in 3 questions, you could stump me because I don't know. That's why I have resources. There are, 300 and something rules about where to put the comma? I don't know. But it's that kind of an idea. And I want students to understand their capability. And I think if I could ask anything of secondary education, it would be simply that your students leave you with the confidence to know that there are those of us on the other side, that continuation, that continuum, that you leave them with the idea that you can do this. Just like you did it in high school, you can do this because it's not really you're not expected to know any more than when you entered the 11th grade or then when you entered the 5th grade. It's simply a beginning place where we start and then move forward. We lose most of our students in developmental education. We lose most of them simply based on their own belief about themselves. We have taken survey after survey after survey, and they'll say it's not the course, it's not the teacher, I just don't know how. And I think, in part, that's why they're in those courses in the beginning. So we're looking at, in fact, this year at UC Claremont, we implemented the freshman year experience. It's been at major universities for years, but we implemented that specifically for this type of student. We have a student success program implemented about 4 years ago. so that they have the support on the college campus that they were used to through their counselor on the high school campus and beyond. We've instituted those kinds of initiatives to try to, again, bridge that gap. We're looking at constantly looking at curriculums, how they overlap, how they meet. The goal is that they simply align, transition from one to another. It's kind of we're in the same place that you are. I think the biggest difference that we're going to make as far as being successful over the next 5 years, the biggest difference we're going to make is that if we begin, as we have started, I think in the last 2 specifically years, if we begin to work in tandem with one another, we begin to communicate more, we begin to see how our standards are moving as kind of that transition as opposed to a stopgap, and we begin to understand one another's situation. And that's the message that I'm trying to communicate, at least in the high schools that I volunteer in, so that hopefully I get feedback. Now, listen, I'm not going to stand up here and fool you and say that all of my colleagues are on the same page I am. I still understand. In fact, I deal with that I'm a college professor, Dr. So-and-so attitude all the time. And it's disheartening to me because now I've been there and I know I'm really not any smarter than when I started that. I just simply jumped through some hoops. I can't say I'm not any smarter. I'm not any smarter in all areas. I know a whole lot about this, but there's a whole bunch I don't know anything about. So I think a lot of it will be the attitude. And that's what I want to communicate to my colleagues in the secondary system. I have another question for you that I want you to answer on the back side of your card that you were given. And I'll make the question short and sweet. I want to know from you, when we think about the high school graduate moving then into a college arena, what do you think we're doing really right? What are we doing well to get them across that gap? It's a lot harder when you have to think about it and put it on paper. But I know we're doing some things well. And we tend to focus on what's wrong that we can fix. My idea, my hope is that if we can expand on what we're doing well, we're going to make a lot more headway faster. So that's what I want to know from you.
Can you repeat one more time? What are we doing well? Sorry.
To bridge that gap
Okay.
between the high school
So from our
and college
perspective, what are we
experience.
doing to be out?
Absolutely. While you're finishing, I want to cut this short. We're past lunchtime, and I don't know about you, but all of my friends say I get really cranky when I get hungry. I want to leave you with this thought. It has come up in several places, but specifically in departmental meetings, the idea of teaching for the sake of teaching, rigor for the sake of rigor. And Casey and I have talked about that before. But the idea that we're teaching to two different audiences, that somehow when a student graduates from high school, in that 3 ensuing months that happens before they come to college, that they transform, and that college professors teach to a different audience, a different student than a high school student. I strongly disagree. As I said in the beginning, and that's kind of the way I introduced this little piece, I think it's the same audience. I think really we do have the same purpose, though I'm going to go on a limb here and say I think that our state and federal government tend to intervene in telling us how we teach a student about life. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not, but I strongly believe that when a student comes to college, we are obligated to teach them writing beyond an academic sphere. And that's where I hope that particularly our students are successful, is that they learn to write for life beyond the academic requirements. And our outcomes as we begun to build those and expand those, that's what the goal is it's beyond you're within these walls for 4 years. If this becomes something that you use beyond that for a specific purpose, who knows? And when I start, I make a list and I put on the board to my students of all the different places and ways that they may use writing. They look at it and go, no, not me. And then I begin to ask them about their experiences, and they see those alignments and think, maybe it does apply. I'm not sure. I had a student tell me the other day, though, this might interest you. He said, you're always saying things like the standards aren't as high, that kids don't have the respect for writing and for education and for learning. He said, but why does it matter? Because it's people like me that's going to be hiring people like me. I didn't say a word. I just thought there's no answer for that right now. I started with that whole global society idea and thought, bless your heart. No, grades are due next week. That'll tell the story. So we'll just let that go. Anyway, thank you very much for having me. If you have questions, I do have my business card here. I don't just hand those out because most people have no use for them. But if you do have questions, I'd be happy to answer those. And please, I really encourage you to go back to your own districts and begin to think about how you can link your secondary teachers with the local, either the regional campuses, the university, the college, whatever it is. There are those of us. Until Casey came along, I'd been volunteering in some of the high schools around, but until she came along, I didn't know anybody was interested. So, there's kind of fault on both sides, but she has been a link for me to some of the local high schools that it's been invaluable, been helpful to me and fulfilling to me as an educator. So I would encourage you to make that move. And hey, they may say, you know what, the door's closed. But there's a real possibility that somebody's interested in working with you on the other side. Thank you very much.